And again, in all but a few of the cases of civilian deaths we investigated, Hezbollah fighters had not mixed with the civilian population or taken other actions to contribute to the targeting of a particular home or vehicle by Israeli forces. Okay, some of you think, how can you trust that human rights organization? Fair enough. Well then, let's look at the U.S. Army War College study, which was based almost entirely on interviews with Israeli soldiers. What did they find? The key battlefields in the land campaign south of the Litani River were mostly devoid of civilians. And IDF soldiers consistently report, listen, little or no meaningful intermingling of Hezbollah fighters and non-combatants, nor is there any systematic reporting of Hezbollah using civilians in the combat zone as shields. Bear in mind, that's based on the testimony of the Israeli soldiers. Now, Mr. Friedman also says that demonic, vicious Hezbollah, rather than confronting Israel's army head-on, it fired rockets at Israel's civilian population to provoke Israeli retaliatory strikes, inevitably killing Lebanese civilians and inflaming the Arab world. Is that what happened? We have very extensive evidence of Hezbollah's tactics during its guerrilla war for 18 years between 1982 and 2000. And the record is very clear. Hezbollah never initiated attacks on Israeli civilians. When Israel initiated attacks on civilians in South Lebanon, that's when Hezbollah retaliated what they called, with some legal justification, belligerent reprisals. And the same thing happened in 2006. When the war began, to the extent it was a war, Israel immediately began targeting civilians in Lebanon. And then the Hezbollah leader Nasrallah said, if Israel attacks our civilians, then we would target Israeli civilians, as long as Israel undertakes its aggression without limits or red lines. So what does the record show? If Israel targeted the Lebanese civilian population and infrastructure during the 2006 war, it was not because it had no choice. The Hezbollah fighters were away from the civilian population and infrastructure. It was not because Hezbollah provoked it, because it was Israel that initiated the attacks on civilians. So why did it do it? Because terrorizing the civilian population was a relatively cost-free method, to use Mr. Friedman's words, of education, much to be preferred over fighting a real foe and suffering heavy casualties. In the case of Lebanon, they did successfully terrorize the civilian population, and it's probably true. Hezbollah will now think once, twice, and 3 times before defying Israel. On the other hand, Israel did not achieve a military victory. In the case of Gaza, it was both able to educate the population by destroying the whole society and murdering about 1,400 of its population, And it was also able in Gaza to achieve, unlike in Lebanon, a military victory. Why? Well, Gideon Levy writes, the fighting in Gaza was war deluxe. Compared with previous wars, it's child's play. Pilots bombing unimpeded, as if on practice runs, tank and artillery soldiers shelling houses and civilians from their armored vehicles, combat engineering troops destroying entire streets in their ominous protected vehicles without facing serious opposition. A large, broad army is fighting against a helpless population and a weak, ragged organization that has fled the conflict zones and is barely putting up a fight. So, Israel thinks, imagines, it's restored its deterrence capacity. Beyond doing that, its other main goal, or the other main goal of the Gaza slaughter, was to fend off, to foil, to defeat the threat posed by Palestinian moderation. For the past 3 decades, the entire international community has agreed on how to resolve the Israel-Palestine conflict. And virtually everybody in this room, I suspect, knows the capsule formula for resolving it. It's called the two-state settlement, based on the full Israeli withdrawal from the territories it occupied in June 1967, and a just resolution of the refugee question based on the right of return and compensation. Every year, the vote is the same in the United Nations. This past year, they put forth those terms for resolving the conflict: 2 states on the June 67 border, resolving the refugee question based on the right of return and compensation. The vote this past year, 2008, it was 164 in favor, 7 against. The whole world on one side, Israel, the United States, Australia, the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, Nauru, and Palau on the other side. You go back to 1989, about 20 years ago. There's a vote on the two-state settlement on the June 67 border in the United Nations General Assembly. The vote, 151-3. The whole world on one side, Israel, the United States, and the island state of Dominica on the other side. You can go through the record, very easy to find. Just go and Google peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine, and you'll see the record for the past 2 decades. The whole world on one side, Israel, backed by the United States, and a few South Sea islands on the other side. The Arab League, in March 2002, it put forth a settlement, 2 states, June 67 border, just resolution of the refugee question. All 22 members of the Arab League approve it. And the Arab League keeps renewing the offer to Israel. You have the whole world as represented in the General Assembly. You now have the main regional organization, the Arab world, putting forth this settlement. Well, things are looking very dire for Israel. They're bordering on a disaster. And now the disaster is full-blown. because Hamas signals